It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Oh, Japanese monster entertainment, how difficult it truly is for me to quit you. On this week's Monster Mondays, I'm digging into something I've never done before, the Ultra series. Now, you might be surprised to hear that I've never watched anything from the series. No Ultraman, no Ultra 7, or Ultra Galaxy Mega Monster Battle, which sounds really freaking awesome, and certainly no Ultra Q. So what better time than now to crack this nut and get into it? So let's back things up a little bit. I don't think I've ever actually stated this before on this show, but everything from Godzilla and Gamera to other things like the Super Sentai series that we know better as Power Rangers here in North America, and Kamen Rider, and series that deal with giant robots and mechas, all of this stuff is its own subgenre in Japan called tokusatsu. Now that literally means special effects. Sometimes it's fantasy, sometimes it's sci-fi, or even horror. But basically, whenever I've said that I'm watching a kaiju film, I was watching a movie in the tokusatsu genre, with kaiju being an even more specific subgenre of that being giant monster films. Of all the tokusatsu characters in the series, the ones that generally keep just the tokusatsu designation would be the TV series like the Super Sentai / Power Rangers type shows, Kamen Rider, and of course Ultraman. I'd almost argue that Ultraman is just as recognizable as the Super Sentai guys. Now, that's now that that's kind of out of the way, let's talk about the Ultra series. The Ultra series was created by Tsuburaya Productions. It started just after the start of 1966 with Ultra Q, which ran for 28 episodes. Now, the original plan for this show was for it to be a little more like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Tsuburaya wanted this to be an anthology and lean a little more into horror. And Tsuburaya submitted their series idea and plan to Tokyo Broadcasting System, and TBS came back after surveying children and basically said that you kind of need to abandon this idea of a horror series and instead bring in more kaiju-style creatures like Godzilla, because dang it, those kids were just bonkers for monsters. Now, this prompted Tsuburaya to change the name of the planned series from Unbalance to Ultra Q, with the Q actually standing for question, and that was actually also a reference to another TBS animated series. Now, the Ultra part was in reference to a popular gymnastics gold medal winner from Japan in the 1964 Olympics that used a technique called Ultra C. So, yeah, Ultra Q was here. And what's more is that Ultra Q and the entirety of the Ultra series forevermore owes a massive debt to Toho Studios and Godzilla. So, and here's the reason why. Eiji Tsuburaya was a bit of a name around Japan. That allowed him access to some of the Godzilla props at Toho. In fact, Toho was an investor in Tsuburaya Productions, so throughout the series, repurposed Toho monster suits made it into the Ultra series. Our monster in this very first episode we're going to talk about, called Gomez, is just a modified Godzilla costume, and it's pretty obvious. But hey, let's talk about the reason why Mr. Tsuburaya was such a big deal around Japan. He created Godzilla. Yeah, Tsuburaya was the special effects guy and basically dubbed the father of tokusatsu. He created the look and the way Godzilla films would be made for 50 years. He won an award in Japan for his work with Godzilla. It's also exactly why Toho was so friendly with his company and an investor and gave him all that access to those other creatures, which he could then modify and put into his Ultra shows. Eventually, we'll get around to it, but Ultra Q was almost immediately followed by Ultraman in late 1966. Ultraman was extremely popular and led to an onslaught of media for the Ultraman character. Are you ready for these numbers? Because it's absolutely nuts. There have been 45 TV series, 18 TV specials, 14 miniseries, 47 theatrical TV and compilation movies, an astounding 96 video games in which Ultra characters appear in, 18 volumes of manga, and 7 comic book series in the US from Harvey Comics, Dark Horse Comics, and now currently Marvel Comics. The Marvel Comics are still going on currently, with a planned crossover with the entire Marvel Universe and Ultraman coming in 2023. But we'll have time to talk more Ultraman shenanigans. Let's get into the first 2 episodes of Ultra Q. Episode 1, Defeat Gomez, and Episode 2, Goro and Goro. Okay, so in Defeat Gomez, we start things off in a tunnel that is being constructed between Tokyo and Osaka. The opening narration almost opens like a Twilight Zone episode where a man tells us that we're going to be shown the peculiar goings-on that happened in this tunnel. And they waste no time to show our first episode monster, Gomez, walking through the tunnel and kind of making it his home. Gomez is a kind of a furry, horned Godzilla. And he's kind of irritated that these people are messing with the place, and it almost seems like he's guarding an egg. But when he's seen by a worker, panic and confusion ensues. Worse, the workers found the egg that Gomez was appearing to protect and brought it out of the tunnel. What we actually find out is that Gomez was looking for the egg, not actually protecting it. We'll learn more about that here in just a moment. But soon we meet Yuriko, also known as Yuri, who is an intrepid reporter at the Daily News. She instantly takes an interest in this weird story about a tunnel that was found inside this tunnel. And she's transported by helicopter there by Jun and Ippei, who are pilots for Hoshikawa Air Service. Now, Jun is a amateur sci-fi writer. There, they see a nerdy little boy who is also checking out the egg. To find out more, Jun and Yuri venture into the cave and run afoul of Gomez. That little nerdy kid and Ippei travel to a temple near the tunnel and learn of the legend of Gomez and Litra. Litra is a big bird creature, and legend says that when Litra's egg is found, Gomez will emerge and destroy the earth, basically, and it requires Litra to hatch and therefore defeat Gomez. So Ippei and the little kid, Hiro, need to warm the egg to help it hatch, while Jun and Yuri try to find a way out of the cave that is collapsing thanks to Gomez throwing a shit fit. Now, Litra hatches, but he doesn't seem to want to do much, even though Hiro asks very nicely for Litra to go and defeat Gomez. It doesn't fly into action until Gomez comes out of the tunnel, and Litra dive bombs Gomez, but Gomez uses his tail to whip the flying creature. And once Litra figures out that he has a citronella acid beam, he uses it to zap Gomez, defeating and killing the monster. Litra flies over, lands on top of Gomez, and dies, having fulfilled his destiny. The narrator says that when you come through this tunnel, you will see a grave that Hiro built for the heroic Litra. So let's now transition into episode number 2, Goro and Goro. This begins at the picturesque Amagi Mountain, and a tour there is being interrupted by a giant monkey. We learned through the opening narration that this creature is kind of our fault. We've been messing around with growth hormones, and these growth hormones were part of a World War II experiment to strengthen Japanese soldiers, but it proved to have a completely different effect on the local monkeys at the mountain. A monkey ate walnuts soaked in the hormone and is now growing very large. It isn't long before Jun, Ippei, and Yuri's editor, Sike, learn about the giant monkey, and they show up to investigate. Now, the reason why Goro the monkey got to be a 50-meter tall monkey is because a deaf-mute man, also named Goro, it's a whole thing, basically left the door open to the lab where the growth stuff was, and then was able to also make off with some other supplies and stuff, and he's now kind of taking care of the giant version of Goro the monkey, and he's stealing fruit from farms around the area to feed Goro. Now, Sike and turns the story into a major hit. But once Yuri has returned from another story that she was covering, he sends her to follow up on this giant monkey story. As it turns out, the other story Yuri was on also had a giant monkey at Ilion Island that the natives worshipped as a god creature. When Yuri, June, and Ippei get to where Goro was found, they discover the human Goro being arrested for all the fruits he's stolen from the farmers. This irritates Big Monkey Goro quite a bit because the two Goros are pretty good friends. They're actually almost kindred spirits. So he does what giant monkeys do, rampage. Well, not really. He just goes into town to try to find his friend and only starts to wreck stuff when he's shot at by local authorities. He actually doesn't mean to do harm. He's just kind of like a bull in a china shop or a giant monkey in a Japanese shop. I don't know. But even when Yuri and June attempt to stop the local army from shooting the monkey, the army basically plans to do so anyway. And that's when Yuri's editor shows up with human Goro and a canister of drugged milk to make the monkey Goro sleep so that they can transport the giant monkey to Ilion Island to live with the other giant monkeys that were transformed by the hormone. The episode ends with Yuri lamenting that Goro doesn't know he's going to be sent to the jungle. And we question which Goro she's talking about as human Goro shouts in sadness over his friend who is slumped over and sleeping due to the milk that he gave him. So let's get to my 3 things I like about the first 2 episodes of Ultra Q. First up, I really do love the framing of each of these episodes. The narration that gives us that Twilight Zone feeling really makes this feel like it really kind of wanted to titillate the viewers. This makes me think that little kids watching the show were both thrilled by the stuff going on and maybe even a little scared of it. I think of this as possibly being something like Doctor Who to a certain extent. It's a show that the family can watch together and watch it, open with these trippy title cards that then lead into this narrator telling us that something bizarre is happening. I'd like to almost think that the narrator is giving us a setup of the story that June writes, since he's the aspiring sci-fi writer. But it definitely has a Rod Serling ring to the tone of voice and the specific dialogue used. In Defeat Gomez, it's really just a kind of stage setter. But in Goro and Goro, it's a very bizarre opening bit of narration talking about a more psychological separation of body and mind. This doesn't just set the stage. It's actually kind of a mind-bending feeling, at least in a sense, as well. But then add the monsters in a black and white format, and you're almost being set up to think of this stuff as a dream or being transported into a completely different world. The second thing I like that also makes me think of Doctor Who to a certain extent, but maybe more of an X-Files feel, is the use of recurring characters. These characters are going to be very used to the strange and bizarre as the series continues. They're going to soon become experts in that strange and bizarre. And I like that there's an instant likability to June, Ippei, and Yuri that shows that each character has a specific role to play within that trio. Yuri isn't just a shrieking violet type of character. She wants to get in and get the story. She wants to be part of it. Sure, June is likely the best stand-in for a hero archetype, but he doesn't just stand in front of Yuri and solve all the problems all the time because he is a man. No, he's actually quite likable and kind of figures stuff out with his friends. And Ippei is the comedic flavor and kind of a simpler doofus, but a likable doofus. I really cannot say how much I like how Yuri nails the feeling that you're supposed to have at the end of Goro and Goro. It was already smart to have both the mute man and the monkey be named that, so when she says that she feels bad that Goro is going to be taken away, you can apply that to both characters. And all that said, I want to see these characters episode after episode. I'm not sure a TV series can get higher praise than that. Thirdly, I like the creatures. Obviously, Gomez is going to have the upper hand, being that he's a modified Godzilla suit, but he's made additionally interesting by giving him big teeth and the horn and the fuzzy face. Goro is just kind of a relatable giant monkey. I don't think it's possible to have a giant monkey not be relatable. Between King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, you can't not like a giant monkey. It was a good idea to make Goro a sympathetic character with his disabled friend, the human Goro. Not to kick a sleeping giant monkey, but that perfectly set up a kind of somber end to that second episode. But the most interesting creature is definitely Litra. Okay, yes, his base shape is that of Rodan, yet we see scales and feathers, and he's almost like this kind of cute creature too, because we shouldn't forget he is a newborn baby when he has to hatch and fight Gomez. But the one thing that is almost blink and you miss it is the peacock tail that he has. That's just a nice touch that adds a little bit more exotic flavor to the creature. And as a final note, I like that Litra fights Gomez on his time, not at your kindly requests. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Next time, we will take one step closer to the conclusion of the Hammer Film Productions Dracula series by bringing the count into the present day, swinging early 70s, with Dracula AD 1972. So until next week, stay spooky.